So, we've been going through my latest book, A Swift Walk Through the Bible. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be talking to you about the book of Judges. So the book of Judges is an interesting book. The book of Judges was the time of writing. It was written around between 1350 and 1000 BC, and it was probably written by Samuel. And if you will recall, Samuel is the last judge of Israel, and he's also the high priest during this period. Now, the book records it covers a period of time when the Israelites were living in the Promised Land, from the time of the death of Joshua until the time that they got their first king. So that's the period of time that we're talking about. So these people, what has happened is Joshua has gone in, and at the direction of God, he's gone in and began to claim the territory that God has set aside, the Promised Land. And so he's gone in and conquered some of the land and divided the land and told them which territories, divided land, and told them who would be where, divided among the 12 tribes. So now at this point, Joshua's ready to die. He's an old man. He's done all he could do. He calls everyone together and he tells them, listen, I need you guys to follow God's orders to the letter. Now God has instructed us and to follow the same pattern that he's followed. He told them, God has told us that we're to go in and we're to clear out these territories. We're supposed to go in, kill everything breathing. Now, some of this may sound, let me just back up for a minute before I go forward. It may sound cruel when God tells them to go in and kill everything breathing. We're talking about men, women, children, animals, everything breathing. And God also instructs them to burn everything, burn the houses, the vineyards, the fields that have been planted, tear down the houses, destroy everything and start fresh. This is what God has instructed them to do. And on its face, it may sound very cruel, but it's not. It's not very cruel when you think about the intention. Remember, God has given them a promise. He's given Abraham a promise. And in order for that promise to be fulfilled, he needs this to happen, because what has happened is these squatters who are living in these territories, they are under demonic influence in every area of their lives. They are not only worshiping these idols, but they even have these idols that are these gods that are over everything. You say, oh, why can't they keep the crops? Because they have gods that they pray to for the crops, and they have gods to pray to for their animals, so everything's under the influence, under satanic influence. So God needs them to clear everything out, and everything. Everything, even the children. The children, you say, oh, well, what is the children? Because those children they've prayed to these different gods, for fertility gods and different things, and offered children and everything else for their fertility. And so everything is under the influence of Satan. And so God needs them to clear everything out so that there's nothing negative to influence them. And then and that's the first part of it. And secondly, you say, oh, well, maybe they could use these things. He doesn't want them to sit around idle. He wants them to busy themselves building homes and planting crops and taking care of their animals. They need to be doing work and not sitting around, with an idle mind. Okay, so that's, so if you could understand that this is why God has given them this direction, because they're a new nation, they're a fledgling nation, and they would be easily influenced. We already know this about them, and all of us. I mean, we know this about human nature. We're easily influenced away from righteousness and into sin. Because let's face it, let's be honest, sin is good. Okay, let's just be honest. Okay, sin is good. It's way easier to sin. Sin doesn't have any rules. You can serve yourself. You don't have any, you don't have to worry about anybody else except yourself. Sin is good. Following rules, being righteous requires you to think of other people. You have to have discipline. You have to sacrifice. You have to put something, you have to plant some seeds in the ground and wait for them to grow. And, it's just, so it's easy to be led away into sin. And he needed them to be holy and righteous and set apart so that they could receive the promise. Okay, so now let's keep going with the story. So anyway, this is the period of time they're in. They're in this period. Joshua's getting ready to die. Joshua calls everyone together and he gives them this long speech. He gives them a Moses sermon. He gives them a long sermon and recounts the whole history of Israel and reminds them of how God brought their ancestors up out of Egypt and how the miraculous way that he rescued them. And he recounts the whole history of Egypt. Of Israel. And then at the end of that long speech, he tells them how their ancestors failed, and he warns them, don't follow in their footsteps, and instead do this right, do this the right way, and you will be blessed. So he gives them this long sermon, and then he dies. Okay, well, that's great, right? They have this instruction, and so he tells them, okay, you guys go in and finish clearing out this territory. Well, instead of doing that, they fell into compromise. The next generation, they fell into compromise. Immediately, they went in and they decided, oh, well, we're not going to kill everybody. We don't have to kill everyone. Hey, let's keep some of these people around so that they can do our work for us and they can do our chores. And then we don't have to do our work. So they kept some around, and one thing led to another, and soon began to take some of the daughters take some of the women as wives and have children with them, and soon they were following their customs and their culture, and they fell into sin, and soon they looked just like the people of Israel looked exactly like the people that God had told them to eliminate. They fell right into sin, and so the writer of this book records 7 cycles of what we call 7 cycles of disobedience. That is, and the 7 cycles are as follows. Here's the cycle, and this happens 7 times. Okay, they start out with sin. That is to say, they start out fine, and then they fall into sin. They start worshiping other idols, their debauchery, all kinds of things. Okay, so sin. That's the first. So there are 5 S's. Sin, followed by servitude. So in punishment, God would place them under the rule of some unscrupulous leader of another country, some other leader that would just, abuse them. And so they're from sin to servitude. And then they cry out to God. Supplication is the 3rd S. So they cry out to God, and God would eventually hear their cry and feel sorry for them and send in a savior for them, send in a judge to save them. And so the judge that would save them. So from sin to servitude to supplication, they cry to God, to salvation. So he sends salvation in the form of a judge to save them, and then they behave for a short time. For some time they would silence. So those are the 5 cycles. So they fall into silence, and then they fall right back into sin. So that's the cycle. They go from sin to sin to servitude to supplication to salvation to silence and back to sin. So the writer records this occurring 7 times, and so this period of 7 until the book finally ends with a very sad ending. The book says just basically everybody, and the book ends. In this time, Israel had no king. Everybody did as they saw fit. That's how the book ends. And so it's a very sad period of time. And what we see in this book of Judges, we see these judges that God raised up to rescue them. And there's, you're familiar with some of the judges, some of the more famous judges. Samson, that's the one. That's the one. He was born, and his parents he took the Nazarite vow, in that he would not, he had certain things as a Nazarite. He wouldn't cut his hair. He wouldn't drink alcohol. He wouldn't, So it was a whole list of things, and he violated all of those things. He was just an idiot. At any rate, he rescued, he was one of the people that God used. Just goes to show God can use anybody, because he was a complete idiot, and God used him. But anyway, then there's, you probably know of some of the more famous ones are Gideon, Deborah and Barak. But anyway, so each time God would use a judge to rescue them from enslavement, from under the ruler that he's placed them under as punishment, and then they would behave for a little while and then fall back into sin. So that's the book of Judges. I personally believe, I don't know that there were only 7 cycles. In my opinion, we know that the Bible uses certain numbers, and we know that the number 7 indicates completeness, or it is. So I believe that what has happened is, at the end of this period of time, the writer is showing that the Israelites were in complete opposition. They just had no intention of keeping fulfilling the terms of the agreement that they made with God, the covenant. They had no intention of fulfilling the terms of that covenant. And so everybody just did as they saw fit. And so that's the message of that book. And so it's a discouraging message, but then we see why that we're on our way on the tumble down, and we'll see that this is why eventually God will come up with a new way of garnering salvation, since they are, he finds that man is just unable to keep the terms of this, the terms of this covenant. And so, this is one of the books that helps us to see why the need for Jesus was, why there was a need for Jesus. So anyway, that's the book of Judges. Okay, and if you want to know the full story, you can pick up the book and you can get the full story of the Bible. But that's just a brief survey of the book of Judges.